Excuse me, those are clearly potato crispy crujientes de papa. So I don't know what you're talking about with your. Are we kicking it off, boys?
I guess so. It is recording. I'll be simultaneously every now and again turning my video off and back on as I sneeze
Yeah,
or
I'll
something
do
like
my
that.
best to sneeze, not sneeze violently. I need to open the window in order to ensure that I'm not going to sneeze violently into the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay.
As much as we'd like the ASMR of your sputum, that's great. That's
ASMR of Russian war criminal podcast. Yeah, but
it.
not a Russian war criminal podcast. This
What
is
does that sound like, an ASMR like that?
lots of
Suka.
yelling. Yeah, a dude being beaten to death with a sledgehammer on video. Oh,
Cutlet. Oh yeah, I saw that too. And I remember reading about those headlines or seeing those headlines, but not at that point, not connecting it to Prigozhin or
yeah.
Pringles. I would just like, oh yeah, people. That's like video game level tyrannical behavior.
I mean, this guy's on. Let's okay. If we're getting ahead of ourselves at this point, we could
Yeah,
maybe just kick it off. That this is the pilot episode of Kinda, which is a podcast dedicated to Ukraine, as well as the ongoing war and the ever growing just heap of bullshit narratives that are surrounding it. Um,
a lot of
but I guess some
information,
introductions.
multiple
Yeah,
different pieces of information. So I guess let me ask you a question really quick, Ben. Is Prigozhin a monster?
yeah. Prigozhin's a war criminal, straight up.
Or is that like a kinda response? I was trying to lean into the kind thing.
Yeah, I dig it. I dig it. No, Prigozhin is unequivocally just war criminal, oligarch. Everything he's ever acquired, he's done through illegitimate means. And but we'll dig into that thoroughly in terms of the early part of his lives, because I think that's maybe the part that I didn't know a lot about, whereas everybody kind of knows him as the head of Wagner and things like that. But yeah, in terms of introductions, just for the world, I guess. My name is Ben Stewart. I'm the voice you're listening to right now, and I'm based in Lviv, Ukraine. So whoever wants to be next.
My name is Miles. I am currently in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I lived in Ukraine for 3 years, and that is where met Ben in the wonderful city of Chernihiv.
Ooh,
So probably
nice
it's my
spot.
turn, right?
Yes,
Uh,
please.
I'm Artem. I do not live in Ukraine already for 3 years. I live in Canada. It's New Brunswick.
You guys
Huh.
swapped out. Um, but yeah, briefly, I guess this is just the pilot episode. I want to just maybe go into the rationale for this podcast. And is everything okay? Your menu just disappeared.
Mine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just turned my camera off.
Okay.
But we're still
Yeah.
recording.
Rationale for this podcast is just based on several things. Long before the war started, and the war started proper, right? The Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. There was just like an insane amount of disinformation that's circulating around America, and I guess you could say more broadly the Western media space. That's been compounded by a number of things. Not first and foremost, but definitely a big share of aggressive and very well coordinated Russian propaganda campaigns that we're going to touch on a little bit in this episode. But also there's, I guess the innate human desire to just point the finger and kind of adhere to a crappy narrative, even if you haven't done any research on it, especially when economic conditions are tight, inflation, things like that. I guess the overall just kind of lackluster element of mainstream media today in terms of reporting on things. So
that, and I would also add the like oversaturation of news and information, and how much people get bombarded on a daily basis with so many different things and topics that just the normal person who consumes media will only get a headline knowledge base of what's going on and stuff like that. And then there's always the communities online that are like the armchair experts. And I don't personally claim to be an expert on anything, but I do claim to hyperfixate and read in rabbit holes. And so
but it's a useful skill though. Wish more people would do that. But I should be doing the same as well, right? I'm here sounding very judgmental, but I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, to your point, like we're this trying to punch through all this noise, right? And just kind of encourage having a reasonable discussion about what we think things are actually like, how things actually are. And this is okay, I guess you could call it an opinion podcast. And if our opinions for any reason make you unreasonably angry, then we encourage you to share this content with everybody that you know and all their family members. So that'd be super. So I guess like this is the point where I'm going to say like grab your popcorn to crack open a beer. If you want to crack open a beer or a LaCroix or however the hell you pronounce it.
I do love me some LaCroix.
Dude, I don't know what it is. But anyway. We're going to open this podcast with our first segment of Vatnik of the Week. So the Vatnik of the Week is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just a prime candidate for this. And I'm going to start this off by extending a big thanks to Pekka Kaljaniemi, whose materials I did draw on partially for this segment. But who is Marjorie Taylor Greene? What do you guys know about Marjorie Taylor Greene? Let's maybe start with that.
We share a last name, and that bothers me.
She has an E on her last name, though. Or do you?
That bothers me even more. She spells it wrong.
She can't even do that.
Offends me to my core. She is a very loud person.
Yeah, I would describe it as equal parts like far right hack, like pro-Russian kind of bootlicker. Not sure why. I don't get that. But we're gonna dig into that. And also like melted candle. So
melted like wax face.
Yeah, and unfortunately she is also a member of the United States House of Representatives from Georgia's 14th district. So this is we can treat this as an opportunity to like, I'm going to treat this as an ad hoc call to all the good people of Georgia. Please vote in like, your mother-in-law, like an actor, or
yeah,
the
I'd actually
literally anyone else.
Something like that. I don't know. There's something to be said about the devil went down to Georgia and then birthed Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, she's not one of those fun kinds of like revolution, like the people that are everyone's shitting on. Like everyone's shitting on her because she
asks for it.
Yeah, this is not like a legitimate sort of oppression thing. She's someone that comes from privilege and just has shitty ideas, and people are, her ideas are losing in the marketplace of ideas, even in the United States government.
Yeah,
which is something. Which is why she's not a comedian anymore. But
so Ben, I got a question for you. So why did you choose her for the Vatnik of the Week? What has she done to support Russia in any way?
Good question, Miles.
Oh, well, look at that transition.
Look at that transition. Yeah, so other than just kind of hanging out with the other Vatniks, right? The Tucker Carlson types and Matt Gasses of the world.
Yeah.
And also, let me just throw this in, this disclaimer. My hatred for Vatniks knows no party lines. So we will discuss Vatniks across the political spectrum.
And for those who don't know, what is a Vatnik? Should we describe that or no?
I don't know. What do you think, Artem?
Well, I'm just reading the tweet, and I'm curious why Nazi are mentioned as white Nazi, because there were no president in history that we have any others.
This is the kind of person we're talking about, though. I mean,
But yeah, I mean,
Russian bootlickers should ask ChatGPT what a Vatnik is.
I can give you time to do that if you want.
Okay.
Artem, you were saying something?
No, I wasn't.
All right. Then I am wrong.
From ChatGPT, as of my last update in September 2021, Vatnik is a slang term used to refer to a certain stereotype of a person, typically from Russia or other former Soviet countries. The term is not particularly flattering and is often used in a derogatory manner. The term Vatnik is associated with several characteristics, including nationalism, conservatism, propaganda and state-controlled media, anti-Western sentiment, stereotypical clothing. Ooh, we should Photoshop like a Ushanka on top of Marjorie Taylor Greene's head.
Yeah, I'm sure we could get a generative AI to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so list of crimes, I guess, for the Vatnik is going to be, promoting Putinist narratives, calling just absolutely baselessly referring to the Ukrainian government as a Nazi state, which is just a tired narrative. It's just so lazy, just sick to death of it. And just generally being kind of a garbage human being, trying to shut down all the United States aid to Ukraine. If you look in the bottom right, which is just, her saying functionally it was when we had the elections, which is if the Republicans won, the House, then not another penny would go to Ukraine, which I think most reasonable people would say is not a super smart idea. But taking all this kind of anti-Western, really what's anti-American, that's the irony of it, right? She's doing this all from like an America First perspective, which is, where you get the tweets in the top right, where she's speaking for us. And she's speaking for you and me, Miles. So it's good that we have people like her telling us what we want.
Yeah.
But
love it.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what to do without her. But yeah, and also doing, shit like in the bottom left, where spinning the narrative entirely, which is, February 24th this year, having a good casual chat with Tucker Carlson where they're just talking about the war against Russia that is in Ukraine. So it's like a NATO thing, right? NATO started a war against Russia in Ukraine, just like completely, just in the same way that the United States started a war against Germany and Poland in the 1940s.
I love that sort of narrative. It's kind of like this weird like victim blaming mentality of like, well, if Ukraine didn't have a border and was trying to be Western, then they wouldn't have been invaded. Like it's somehow Ukraine's fault for being invaded. And I don't know.
Yeah. I think like March 2022, she was tweeting shit like Ukraine kept poking the bear, which is Russia, and Russia invaded, which is exactly to your point. Like just what? There's no win for Ukraine here. Russia is very successful in their invasion. And then just the classic, right? And this is again politically independent. When you have an issue with someone, all you have to do is call them Hitler, and that just justifies any position. So she's saying that Ukraine is just this white Ukrainian neo-Nazi regime, which Artem, in case you didn't know, you grew up under a white Ukrainian neo-Nazi regime.
I knew pretty well, but this is not even close to neo-Nazi.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Unfortunately, even to talk about it. So it's like nice tweet, but it's literally all arguments they sound as just tweet, not thoughts or arguments, just random words.
I guess it's no longer a tweet though. It is now an X. I don't even know what they're trying to rebrand that to. Have either of you seen that?
Yeah, I have, because I'm on it. But yeah, the other fun side of that, Artem, and to your point, is that a lot of this shit she deleted after she posted it, which is just the sign of a true brave American.
So you're saying she like functions in a way of manual chat GPT. She'll write something like like pilot version of chat GPT, and then she deletes and you cannot restore the session.
Yeah, but she's like, I don't even know how to put it. She's just like an ultra-right Christian nationalist, right? She's a self-described Christian nationalist, right? And we can get into the weeds at some point of like who else is like a very self-described Christian nationalist. I'll give you a hint. His name starts with V and ends with Vladimir Putin, but
never heard of this man.
Yeah, no. But yeah, it's just all the worst of populism, right? So I would just classify her as a Trump wannabe that's trying to get attention by screaming that she's been wronged. One of the people that are striking down things like student loan bills, when she herself, I think, did over 100K in student loan forgiven loans. So just, on top of this, I don't know what the aim is. I don't know if it's just like the Russians got to her or something like that, like they got to Tucker Carlson. But I don't understand how you could even, as a news channel, Miles, you speak to this, how could you ever refer to like aid for a country that was invaded without any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Provocation. And for all you people that are going to say NATO provoked it in the comments, just go fuck yourselves ahead of time. Save me the trouble. But how could you call it the Ukrainian pimp on news? Like what? $10 billion to the Ukrainian pimp. That's the first one. And like, also compared to the total defense budget, Miles, I think we were chatting about this offline one time. Like, how much money have we spent to Ukraine? Like 100 billion?
Yeah, I mean, the last time I checked, it was, and this was a while ago, so these figures don't add up, but it was like, I don't know, 4% of our entire yearly budget, just the year of like 2022 or something like that. I'm sure it's vastly different now. In fact, I should probably get actual numbers on that.
I remember you had it like broken down to numbers at some point where it's like each American tax-paying American's paying like 2 cents a day or something like that in order for
Yeah.
Ukrainians to wipe Russians off the map, which is the best investment I've ever heard.
Yeah, I do these things where like I mentioned earlier, like I go on these rabbit holes, and like I am a what you would call a doom scroller, but also like a rage scroller. And so like I'll get into forums and I'll read things and I'll just make myself angry. It's not healthy. It's not a good thing to do, but I'll get so caught up in what some people are saying that I will then go on like what is my gonna call what is the war, the crusade? I'm editing that out later. I would go on a crusade basically to like disprove this person because of not only just like a gut feeling, but just like knowing that what they're saying is bullshit. And then yeah, anyway, so yeah, that was a big thing. Is like somebody made like a very misleading graph about how the Ukraine war in just its first year has cost more than all other wars in America combined, and completely misleading data visualization. And fortunately they were mostly called out, but they were very much sticking to their guns in the entire discussion about how their graph and their chart, I think it was like data is beautiful, like a Reddit subreddit, and they did not back down from their claim even after being proven wrong. Anyway, I'm gonna cut this entire thing out later. I'm gonna get these actual numbers. I'm gonna make a note of this.
Okay. Well, and that's our Vatnik of the week segment. This could also just be interpreted as people that are worth ignoring, if you want to think about it that way.
Well, I want to make one last point about this because it's interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong. But there is a mentality, like a Russian mentality of I am the victim and I am justified in my actions because I'm a victim thing. Ooh. And you see that coming historically from Russia since way back in the day of Moscow. Like it goes back so far. And is almost like a cultural piece of their like cultural fabric in a way. And then we start seeing that exact same kind of like tactics and thoughts and arguments being made that use that same line of thinking. And then like the whataboutisms and stuff like that. And I know whataboutism has now become kind of played out and contentious when it comes to saying, well, I'm talking about this and you're talking about this, blah blah blah. But am I wrong in thinking that sort of like victim mentality that Russia has?
I'm gonna let Artem answer that one, because I have my answer.
That's probably the exact definition what they use, and it's applied to everything. Like they do it like on social media the same. So like whatever happens bad with Russia, so that's somebody else's fault, and whatever happens like abroad, for them it's not their business, and usually they only like give freedom and liberate territories. So this is the entire agenda, how they're thinking, or like how they position themselves like on this planet.
Yeah, I mean, that would also partially. I mean, we could do a podcast on that by itself, if not like a series. Yeah, but that's Miles, agree 100%. That's like trying to remember how many references to like, but there was a whole meme video that was not a meme video. There was a video put out by a very good YouTube channel called Telebachenie Toronto, which I encourage everybody to watch, where they did a whole episode on the whataboutism of, people in the Donbass, where there's all these Russian lib bloggers and coming out and saying like, well, where was the Ukrainian government for 8 years when, you were bombing your own citizens? And that's the whole narrative, right? It's just the Russians, they came in, they came in, they identified, I say in giant air quotes, because again, we'll touch on how they do this shit around the world, not only in Ukraine, but also in Africa, Bosnia.
And speaking of which, that's a good segue to kind of like the main topic of Prigozhin or Pringles. 2014, I did not know, and I'm getting ahead of ourselves. I did not know Prigozhin was actually a huge part of the war in Donbass. I did not know that. Anyway.
That is specifically what Prigozhin claimed to have founded Wagner for.
Yeah.
Protecting the interests of
the Russian people. Yeah.
In the Donbass. But
and then people
we'll
will claim like, no, it's just Ukrainians fighting Ukrainians. Well, no, that's stupid.
It's another strategy the Kremlin also uses, where they'll just throw several versions of the same narrative out, and they'll see which one sticks. So you'll have someone saying like, "Oh, it's a civil war," and then you'll have someone saying, "No, it's a NATO-funded coup," and you'll have someone else saying like, "No, it's a Nazi coup," and it's just like, what?
I think they call that like the spaghetti defense, which I probably am not remembering that correctly at all. But it's like you throw out all these different kinds of arguments and see which one sticks.
Yeah,
Trump did that a lot.
They do that to a T, but I will save that for your part in the IRA coming up here. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
So who's this guy? This guy is Yevgeny Prigozhin, which apparently is super hard for certain people in the internet to pronounce. So you brought this to my attention, Miles. He's I guess been given the moniker Pringles, like the snack, ruining them forever for me. So despite the fact that he looks like, a kind of a slightly alcoholic, half-melted version of Dobby the elf, this is a man that grew up relatively, there's so much going on. He's done so much work to control the narrative around himself.
Yeah.
But
he's really good at it.
Yeah. Oh, he's one of the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard for me to think of other people that are better than him at this. But in terms of who this person is and where they came from, I'll try to touch on this relatively briefly. Born only child, June 1961 in Leningrad, which for those not in the know, that is St. Petersburg, when it wasn't named after Lenin, or when it was named after Lenin, rather. So born to a miner who is a Jew. So Yevgeny Prigozhin is half Jewish. His mother was a hospital nurse. Grandfather was a captain in the Red Army, one of the very few that survived, right? There's a meme in that. But he received a badge, and Prigozhin was so happy about his grandfather getting a badge from the Red Army that he made a movie about it.
Yeah.
Go on that another time. Yeah. So very varied life, crazy life. Right? He grew up relatively modest. Sorry, Miles, go ahead.
No, it's cool. I'm pretty sure also, and I don't know where the source is on this one, but I think his father passed away when he was 9.
Yes.
And then he had a stepfather who was like a ski instructor.
Yes.
And like gave him the love of skiing.
And Prigozhin was, let's just call him Pringles. I'll call him Pringles for clarity for the rest of the podcast. Pringles was on course to, have a pretty successful skiing career. That was apparently what he wanted to do with his life when he was a teenager growing up, and he was quite good at it because his stepfather, Samuil Friedmanovich, which is also a very Jewish name, was a ski instructor, right? So he got him into it, and that was a thing. And he was on, it's weird to think about how things could have been different had he just been a skier. But he got injured. So he got injured apparently pretty badly. So he wasn't able to pursue that. Although he did a stint as a fitness trainer at a kids' sports school. But I also like this line. And there's a line of Wikipedia I loved where let's see, who is this? Igor Yefimilych. Yeah, where Yevgeny or Pringle spent some time with one of his great uncles working in an open pit uranium mine, which is just the most Soviet type of uranium mine I could possibly think of.
Yeah, there's a lot. We're going to be talking about uranium a couple different times during this conversation, I think. I think also, I'll let you get there first, actually. We can go ahead and finish.
Good. So, unfortunately, he did not go on to become a skier. He went on to get involved in criminal activity. So he was picked up for robbery when he was still a minor. He did a stint just working in a fat chemical plant out in Veliki Novgorod. But that was, I think, when he was just 18. What he did after he got back in 1980, he joined a gang. And I actually read the court case documents for this. So there's a certain degree of absurdity for it. But long story short is that they were running around and just, old classic balkonchiki, which is just, second story workers. They pop open the door, someone stands outside, they clean the place out, then try to obviously sell it. But the crime that got them all pinned was they choked out an old woman. And specifically, it was Pringles that choked the old woman out while another guy threatened her with a knife, rather. And the third person stole her earrings and boots.
Yeah.
Worth 50 rubles.
Rubles. What is that
But,
today?
that got him hanged. Yeah. Sorry?
What is 50 rubles today?
I have no idea.
I can say for the exchange rate that was around $25 officially.
Big money.
Big business.
Wow,
But
if you live in Soviet Union, it is big money. But I understand it's like nothing. That was nothing generally, and didn't worth anything back then.
Yeah.
So he really did just like start at the bottom and then work his way to a top, because today his net worth is $1 billion. He's a billionaire.
Jeez.
I got sources. He is
it's difficult to estimate his net worth now.
Yeah, because a lot of his like resources is mostly secret in a way, but based on his worldwide advantageous projects, it's easy to kind of say his public assets would equal out to be about $1 billion. So the man is definitely well off.
Yeah. And in traditional like 90s oligarch style, I'm sure you guys ran across the name Concord Management and Consulting.
Yep.
I'm sure listeners have too. So that's owned by his mother. Who's like
I did. Oh, that's right. I do remember reading something that she's now like I don't think she was the original owner, but now she is, or she's definitely leadership.
He founded it in 95 and then owned it until 2009, and then realized it's not a good idea for tax write-off purposes to be owning that.
Yeah.
So he let his mother own it. So she's.
And what does that do? What does the consulting group do? Do we know?
I will get to that later.
Okay.
That's a whole segment.
Yeah.
Lost nest.
Yeah.
But yeah, fun fact about the crime that got him pinned and like sent to that high security penal colony, right? He got a 12-year sentence functionally for all this stuff that they hit him with. There was an improperly reported scandal that he was involved with child prostitution, but that was a result of a misreading of the Russian criminal code, actually. So what they did is they did not involve child prostitution. They did not do anything involving child prostitution. What they did is they found like this minor kid, like 16-year-old, and they just got him drunk and dragged him along for a lot of this stuff. And that was within the same codex as child prostitution, because just like anything criminal involving children. But also fun fact, there was a time when they went and broke into an apartment, but then they got cold feet at the last second because they felt like what they did is I think it was 24 of a certain street number in St. Petersburg, and they just robbed the place clean. You know what I mean? And then 5 days later, they go back to rob the adjacent building, literally like the next building. Like it was number 24, I think, Vyazhinska or something like that. And then they got cold feet and they didn't rob the place. And Prigozhin tried to use that in the court case as saying like, well, we didn't rob the place even though we wanted to, kind of get that written off. And the judge was like, no, you cannot. Does not excuse you from what you've done. But anyway,
and these were Soviet era courts.
1980.
Yeah.
Okay. This is so they're going on about like parasitic lifestyles and like the corruption of a minor and things like that, like very old kind of. So reads very Soviet. But I will put the English translation in the description of this when we publish, so everybody can enjoy it. But yeah, so what does he do? He goes to jail in this high penal colony, spends 9 years because of good behavior, gets out, reports. So now he's established himself. So he's a guy with a criminal past. He's been down in the muck, and that's gonna give him a reputation that will serve him greatly as he continues down his career path. But what's the important thing to note here? The important thing to note here is that I think, and I mean this with all due seriousness, I'm very sure he developed an anal fixation while he was in prison.
I mean, you can just tell by his lips in this photo.
God.
Which brings me to my next later on theory of the relationship between him and Putin. We'll get there.
No.
We'll get there. It's going to get graphic. Rated R.
But yeah, this is the point. If you've ever heard this guy talk in Russian, which Artem, I'm sure you have.
Which one of them? Because I see two people here.
The man whose face has been photoshopped on
the original face. Okay,
face. So the face of Pringles, right? I don't know what his thing is, but he just brings up everything to him is just an asshole reference. Something is being shoved into an asshole. There's licking involved. It's very graphic, right? For these situations where it's ordinarily, I think, completely uncalled for. Like, there's no reason to insert that kind of
I don't know. I guess we have similar, like, is it a colloquialism in English? Like, we always say shit hit the fan. This is shit. God damn it. This is bullshit kind of a thing. We do love shit here in America.
But he would, instead of saying that, like, that's a great example where I would expect someone to say that in English. He would probably say something like, someone got a fist up their butt. And just for no reason. I have no idea why. But again, if you do listen to the guy talking Russian, he constantly kind of goes on about this. I don't know if that's a jail sort of thing or what.
What does that say in his arm? Needs the boot, don't forget. Or is this an actual photoshopped image? Because I think you mentioned it was.
No, this is from an old Soviet movie.
Oh, okay, got it.
Post picture.
So it's definitely. I mean, it definitely doesn't.
That was a comedy with the reference, like to real, Prison Ink, but yeah.
This is a Photoshop. Sorry, go ahead.
That's why I said like two people I see.
Yeah. So he does his stint in prison. He gets up. He learns how to do some lathing. He did some forestry work. And then when he started getting moved, he got moved to a forestry complex. He was put in solitary confinement initially, but he was violating it constantly somehow. Not entirely sure how. I couldn't really find a good source on that. But he gets out, right? And you can see there's quite a bit of distance between the guy standing behind Vladimir Putin here and this dude. So let's talk about that very briefly, because we're kind of just burning through time here. There was a line in Wikipedia that I loved because it's just very reflective of how things were done in Russia in the 90s. Quote unquote here. Prigozhin followed the entrepreneurial spirit of the times and founded or became involved in many new businesses. Translation for those who aren't in the know, that means he did a shit ton of crime, right? So you read some kind of conflicting sources, but there are functionally three things that he really got involved in the 90s. The number one was grocery stores. He basically knew a guy just by pure chance. There was an old schoolmate of his called Boris Spector, and eventually he would hook up with Yevgeny Prigozhin, and Spector would make the Prigozhin the manager of this grocery store chain. It was the first grocery store chain in St. Petersburg back in the day, because they didn't have anything in the 90s. And that was extremely successful for him. Prigozhin also apparently worked at his mother and his stepfather's hot dog stand, an open air market in St. Petersburg, and just found wild success from the hot dog stand, which is not suspicious at all, right? So if anybody here is curious as to how you can find wild success at a hot dog stand in St. Petersburg in the early 90s, when the hot dogs could very well have been made out of shoe leather and cats. I will point.
A joke. Sorry about that.
Huh?
Oh, sorry, shoe leather and cats. It wouldn't be a joke.
Oh, you're saying it would actually be made of shoe leather and cats?
Well, I remember my 90s. It wasn't Russia, but it was Ukraine. But it was possible to find. Like that cat sold as a rabbit. So no jokes about that.
Yeah, I would have assumed more pigeon, but I guess there's plenty of cats. Oh God.
Pigeons are harder to catch. They're flighty. But point being that I'll reveal the secret to you. This is a source that I didn't really heavily dig into, but there was a criminal investigative journalist in Russia that did a piece, I think, on Prigozhin, and the title of it was in Russian, "С каждого ларька по $100," which in English translates to the gangsters were pulling out $100 basically in enforcement and or quote unquote protection fees from every stand. So I don't feel like it's unreasonable kind of to put 2 and 2 together in that situation. Where did Prigozhin's hot dog stand find success? There it was. Boom.
Entertainer.
They were they were just defending all the other stands. Security.
Yes.
It's very mob-esque.
Yes. As is very befitting of the 90s, right? Which are a very chaotic period. So the second industry, this is an interesting one, that he got very involved in was gambling.
Yep.
Yes. Which
I
is
remember
his
reading
old
about that.
friend. Yeah. His old friend Boris Spector and another guy named Igor Gorbenko. They made Pringles the CEO of a company called Spectrum, which opened up the first casinos in St. Petersburg. Like if you're wondering why you're hearing the word first in a lot of these instances, you have to remember this is a very immediately post-Soviet Russia where they didn't have, things like McDonald's and freedom of press and casinos.
They had McDonald's.
Did what?
They had back then McDonald's in Russia. The first one was opened 1989 in Moscow.
You're right. You're right. I'm curious now as to whether that when the first one was opened in St. Petersburg.
That's a good question.
But I'm also happy now that they've been there is no longer McDonald's in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, what is it now? They renamed it. They rebranded it at the beginning of the invasion.
What is it, Art? What is it?
It's like Uncle something. Uncle.
Вкусная точка.
Oh my god. Вкусная точка. Like tasty and like that's it. Like tasty and done or something like that. I think
I thought it was like an Uncle something. Diadco burger. I don't know.
No.
Maybe that's the case. Perfect. No, I'm pretty sure you're right, Artem. But I also Miles, I remember seeing something similar, so now I'm curious about that too. But anyway, getting back to this. So here's an interesting note where if Pringles was heavily involved in opening casinos in St. Petersburg back in the 90s, and he would have, lots of interactions with official bodies at that point because these official bodies would have appeared for the first time. So who wants to do a guess, if you don't know, of who was the chairman of the supervisory board for casinos and gambling starting in 1991?
Pringles?
No, but that's a good guess.
I mean, it is topical. I don't know who.
Vladimir Putin.
Oh, right. That's a thing. Putin's an enigma.
Yeah.
He was already back
So
in Germany.
is this where they think that he met up with Putin the first time?
Artem, I'll let you finish your thought and then go on.
Well, we're talking about the time when Putin got back from Germany. And if we think of when they met for the first time, so I wouldn't say that it's possible to plot the time of that, because after his time in jail, that was already his second time you spoke about, and he didn't do all 12 years.
He did 9.
Oh, yeah, so he did 9. So that was already second term, and just 9 years out of 12, and he got out because of collapse of the Soviet Union, or because some other reasons we don't know about.
Good behavior.
Well, what is good behavior in a jail?
He swept really well.
You cut
Maybe-
down lots of things.
Maybe that's where they assigned him in the kitchens.
I do not know. Oh, we will get to that as well. But anyway, so yeah, there's certain people, certain sources, especially specifically Novaya Gazeta, which thinks that Prigozhin may have at least encountered Putin for the first time when he was in this gambling stuff, right? Not necessarily. I couldn't find any solid evidence or even tangential evidence of those two having a particularly strong relationship or relationship of any kind throughout the 90s. But long story short, he made a crap ton of money selling hot dogs. I mean, $1 million. So there was, I think in 93, he went to the United States and said that he was inspired to open a chain of hot dog stands and that he made his first USD 1 million that year. But that was also from a document that his lawyers, I think, put together when they were trying to put an application into Interpol to remove the red notice that's currently out on him. So context. What is more reliable and seems to be more consistent with across several narratives is the fact that he got hooked up with his buddy Boris and he became a manager of a store. The stores grew in number to about 10, I think, units in 93, these grocery stores called Contrast. And around 95, he decided to bug another one of his contacts, a guy named Kirill Zeminov, to go into the restaurant business with him. So that year, they opened a big restaurant called the Old Customs House, did pretty well. They decided to expand it based on inspiration by waterfront restaurants on the Seine. So
yeah, didn't he like remake an old rusted boat into a restaurant?
Correct. He spent almost $500,000 on a giant ass rusty boat, and he turned it into a floating restaurant that is called New Island, which is pictured here, and found wild success among Petersburg's political and financial elite. I will pop open this list here because starting in early 2000s, New Island started catering to heads of state, the rich and the famous and the beautiful. This specific picture here is George W. Bush, as you can see pictured in the far right, with Yevgeny Prigozhin standing behind him and Putin center. But this is where...
Can I just comment on how he looks like a lurch in the background here? Like the way his eyes are on Putin like that. That's good. Picture does say 1,000 words.
The hand tucked into the coat, like security detail.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to point out the fact that I don't think, he's barely standing. Like if you look at that ceiling, the ceiling is not very high.
This is almost like a Renaissance painting because like there's so much interpretation you can get off of everybody's like face in this photo, like where they're looking, what their facial expressions are saying. We even have this like it looks like a waitress perhaps in the background right there, just kind of standing by. This is a beautiful photo.
I'd also like to point out that I did study abroad in Russia for quite some time, and I think they still have the exact same coffee cups from that era. They're using same cutlery and things like that, but there's no cutlery on the table with the same like tea sets. I remember those things very distinctly.
Do you think they ordered for Bush, or do you think Bush ordered something off the menu himself somehow?
Oh God, I don't know. It's Bush.
Like what would he order at a Russian restaurant like this?
A steak.
A burger.
A burger. Yes.
We have a proof of that.
Yes, you would order. That is actually right. Oh, there you go. You would order a burger. Yeah. But yeah, the list of people that ate at that restaurant is a mile long.
Let's jump into some conspiracies.
Oh God. I mean, it's basically just name a country, and I could probably, because I have the list in front of me. If you name a country, I could probably find someone like Queen Sofia of Spain, U.S. President George Bush, the chairman of the People's Republic of China, Jiang Zemin, Prince Philip, Prince Charles of Wales, Albert of Monaco, Angela Merkel, Gerhard Schroeder, Tony Blair, Silvio Berlusconi. Basically, you name it, they had food on that boat. This was a ridiculously famous boat.
Do you think Pringles was at every single event standing just like that in the background? Just staring at them?
There's a curious amount of I mean, it's hard to separate the things that people want you to read about him. Probably he wants to read about him. He wants you to read about him, what actually happened. He says, I mean, Pringles himself said that, Putin was impressed by the fact that like Pringles would take plates and Pringles would help clean up and Pringles would serve food himself, So very much this like, on the one hand, kind of an ideal servant, ideal waiter.
A servant of the people, you would say.
Yeah. Yeah. A guy that knows his place, someone comes from humble beginnings and blah, blah, blah.
The salt of the earth.
Salt to the goddamn earth. Anyway, around the same time he created a new island, he created a company called Concord Catering. It was a very big year for him, 1995, 1996. So you will probably recognize that Concord Catering sounds a lot like Concord Management and Consulting, which is the company that I want to say Mueller indicted. Miles, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. It was the Mueller report had him in that.
Yes. But we can skip into the 2000s at this point functionally. Oh, goodness gracious. That's too far. Because at this point, this is 2002 with George Bush. At this point, Prigozhin and Putin started hitting it off. Prigozhin was in charge for the catering of Putin's 2003 birthday party. His company, Concord Catering, started receiving these gigantic contracts. Things to like feed all Moscow schools. Feed all Moscow military.
I got something for this, for the schools.
Go for it.
So yeah, he got these gigantic contracts and was feeding and doing these like ready-made meals for schools, which I mean isn't very dissimilar to what like I grew up with in elementary school, like these ready-made meals that you'd get. But he unfortunately came under fire when he accidentally gave, I think, 127 kids dysentery with his products through his company, and parents were not happy about that. And I'm pretty sure there was never any kind of like ramifications or like there was lawsuits and stuff like that, but I don't think anything actually materialized. But he just basically poisoned these kids, young children, and then said it's not our fault. He blamed some like rural southern like food processing plant in southern Russia or something like that.
Was that in 2019?
That was in this article. Yeah, this article's from 2019.
Yeah, I remember the great dysentery outbreak.
Yeah,
in Moscow.
Yeah,
like,
it's
where else?
impressive.
Come again.
Well, if the article was from 2019, it's impressive how many things already happened. Like Syria already happened, Africa happened for him. Like so many things already. Like he expanded his business activities worldwide, literally, and still was in the food business in Russia.
Yep.
And he clearly forgot to do a dysentery check while he was trying to send his mercenaries out to Syria. But
yeah, I think I said it was the cottage cheese. So let that be a lesson: don't eat Russian cottage cheese.
The redheaded stepchild of cheeses. But anyway, points from the 2000s that are of note, right? His Concord Catering starts just raking in contracts. I mean, like $1.2 billion in contracts all the way up to 2012. That's an insane amount of money, especially when you start thinking about it in rubles. This is still not like a very rich, like this is not a country where the average GDP, like the average and the income per capita is very high. At that time, especially. So, and in terms of strictly catering events, you know, Prigozhin's catering very, very high level Kremlin holiday events, like honoring the fatherland dinners, Medvedev's 2008 inauguration, like I said, Putin's 2003 birthday party. But at the same time, and unsurprisingly, the closer that he got to Putin, the more random ass contracts he got for his increasing network of shadow companies here. So it started with things like general food supply, like we're talking about, to the Moscow schools, to military complexes, things like that. And then you stretch into, you know, military cities, military outposts. And then you stretch into things like he now has a company that's supplying infrastructure. So people that are delivering the gas, people that are ensuring the electricity and water get there, people that are building military complexes in the Belgorod region next to the Ukrainian border, right? So he's just like exponential growth in all directions in terms of the government contracts he's getting. Obviously, lots of maneuvering going, lots of rigging going on. The Russian government has an official policy where they have to accept the lowest bidder on any contract, which that by itself kind of speaks volumes. But there was like systematically rigging. There was systematic rigging going on, basically, where someone would be getting, you know, all the prices for all these contracts, and then Prigozhin's company would be like 99.99 the price of the lowest bid, and then he'd automatically win. So that's not shocking. And Navalny's anti-corruption fund did a lot of work on him, but we can get into that later as well. So this kind of positions us at this point into the birth of the Internet Research Facility, because not a great deal, but a good amount of money that he definitely made on these contracts went to the Internet Research Facility, which I've actually seen in St. Petersburg. It's just kind of right there. Can't go inside, but just on the corner there. It's a weird building compared to everything else. But Miles, I'll let you dig into this one a little bit.
Well, yeah, well, the building is like extremely unassuming, right? But I guess if you were to like picture what an internet troll factory would look like, I don't really know what comes to mind visually, but that's it. I'm curious what this picture is of Michael Moore you have here, though. You want to jump into that now, or do you want me to just kind of go on a rant?
I can just briefly answer the picture question. That is from Wikipedia, so I can source that
Okay.
in the description. But that was a anti-Trump rally in New York in 2016 that was allegedly organized by a Russian group.
Oh yeah,
So,
they faked an entire like outrage thing.
yes.
And had two opposing people show up and just basically create chaos, because that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of the Internet Research Agency. Again, very ambiguous name. But what was always so interesting to me is like this organization has this name, and like they're so good at this kind of like propaganda and like dousing all of these anger fueled controversial arguments online, and yet they still gave a name to this entire organization, which is the Troll Farm. And so okay, I kind of want to go back to the first time I ever like started reading about or was being told a little bit about Russian interference within politics, or with the sole intent of just like sowing chaos, not only in the United States but all over the world. Like the Russian propaganda machine is really, really good. They do an amazing job at creating this kind of chaos. And like from surface level, you wouldn't think that the power of pissing people off behind a keyboard would influence, say, for example, like an election, like it was purportedly doing it back in 2016. You wouldn't think that like just because somebody can get online, give themselves a name like Joe, when really it's like Dima over there in the corner in this building, paid very well to piss people off. Like, but it's completely changed the culture of how people communicate. It's completely changed my family reunions, because my uncle is just this, you know, exactly what you'd think of a Republican uncle, comes over and spouts off all this like bullshit propaganda stuff that is clearly not real, but and yet still feeds into it. And like it's become this like life force for some people. Their entire identities have just kind of been shaped around the trolling that the IRA, Internet Research Agency, has done. And they're not done. But what I didn't know is that the IRA was actually like, I initially thought that Pringles was like a director who maybe was brought on after the fact, after it was already founded. But no, he actually founded it in 2013. And I think it was in response to what was happening within Ukraine a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But when it came to like Maidan, and when it came to like what was the president's name in Ukraine at the time that Maidan occurred over? Yanukovych, yeah. But they really like Prigozhin, like I'm pretty sure also when he was like starting up his companies back in the day, he also went really into marketing studies. Did you read anything about that?
I read that he in the 90s was involved in marketing studies, but I did not dig.
Yeah. And so this is a man who really understands the power of word and controversy and knows his audiences, especially when it comes to like he would, if he wasn't who he is, he would be like an award-winning information communications person because of how good he ran this organization. And so, like I said earlier, it was established in 2013. It's also known as Glavset and Teka. I don't know where those names come from. But they did disinformation and influence campaigns on social media platforms in Western countries, especially around 2016. And so they would create all these fake social media accounts and websites and blogs and news articles that were just completely fake, just to promote certain narratives. But even though he founded this back in 2013, I mentioned, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the Russian history, like Russian disinformation and geopolitical conversations have been going on for years and years and years. Like they even are cited as having played on race relations within the United States going back to like the 50s and 60s. And so they are.
No, sorry, good.
No, please.
I was gonna say, like, if anybody could speak to the rewriting of history that Russia and I think by extension the Soviet Union was engaging in, you know, who's going to understand that shit better than the Ukrainians?
Right. Yeah, you're not wrong. Absolutely.
Artem, like, what's the, just for question here, what's the oldest example, Artem, that you can come up with of like Russians blatantly just rewriting shit? Trying to think of like Catherine the Great, you know, going back in her deal with the Cossacks.
Yeah, but before that, the word Russia is weird in the entire context of the changing things we're talking about. So probably we should start that Russia wasn't Russia till the like 18th century. So Peter the Great, they called the country Russia, because before that, that was Dutch of Moscow. So you will never find a document of 15th or 14th century when like Russian territories called Russia.
Because it was Moscovian, right?
Yeah, that was Moscovia, and that was the name of the country. But from this, like, it's not like changing the history. They just renaming constantly, like, and few times they're doing it like all the time. It happened not only to Ukraine. It happened to Belarus. It happened to Baltic countries. It happened to many territories that Russia like was involved in, and like probably the best example is, I don't know, like everything I can think of, that the entire Russian history goes to the Golden Horde times, and when that was just the Urbia of the Golden Horde and Mongol Empire, and all the changes started from there, because the Ukrainians, okay, like elsewhere in Europe, like countries or Dutches, they have wars like with each other, so there's no surprise in that. But no one in their like mind would call like other nations, or would take other nation's name or other nation territory like without having that territory. That's what happens to Russians. So they like usually call everything they can. They can call it Slavic, and then they would call it Russian. And it's not. This is not my words. Those some like Czech writer, if I'm not mistaken, like said that. So the same happened to Poland in 19th century when they tried to wipe like Polish language from Warsaw, and that was an attempt to change the church from like Roman Catholic to the like Russian Orthodox Church, and didn't work out. But the same approach, exactly the same approach, worked out in Belarus, because Belarus wasn't like a Orthodox country before Russia. So they changed Greek Catholic country they were.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yes, the entire country. state-owned country. And this is exactly how it works. So like Russian church in Europe or like in the States, they're not just church, it's institution of Russian impact worldwide. So I don't know how it works, for example, in like they used to have settlements in California back in the time when they had Alaska as a Russian territory. I don't know how it works now, but like the settlements, this how it starts
I remember
with Russians.
specifically to your point in California, I remember reading, and maybe Miles, you caught this too, a few months ago about like there was an FSB operation that was uncovered in California that was basically fueling segregation campaigns, like an independent California. The unfortunate part of this is that this Pringles guy's involved in so much and just so much, horrible shit. I mean, just frankly, horrible shit. If you think about just the scale of chaos that this one man has caused.
Yeah.
And but each of these things, like the IRA, and then also, Wagner, are worth several episodes unto themselves. So we kind of have to touch on them a little bit. We can't dig too far here because
I'll conclude kind of what I was talking about with the IRA and stuff like that. We had known, like, the FBI, United States intelligence, knew that Prigozhin was behind these kinds of things way early on. But there was never any kind of like actual admission of guilt until just last year, actually. And Prigozhin is actually quoted as saying, when asked about like comment about having admitted that he was behind the election interference, he said, "During our pinpoint operations, we will remove both kidneys and the liver at once." It even says in the article that was cryptic. And so it's very, very clearly intended to have the most negative impact on like US society, Western society as much as possible. And then when it comes to the use of these kinds of tactics, like I mentioned, it's very inflammatory. It's supposed to like sow chaos and stuff like that. It worked. And it's still working today, even though he's come out and said that, yes, we did this on purpose. There's plenty of documentation, not only from the US intelligence, but say British intelligence, because Britain was not immune to this. I mean, there's plenty of speculation about what that did to impact their election and election interference. Multiple different countries knew this was happening. And like I said, it worked. Trump today, the people who follow him and love him as the God Emperor that he is purported to be, still just say like, "Oh, Russia had no influence on this." That's bullshit. Like, Prigozhin is the reason why your uncle is hated at the family reunions, because they just keep feeding into this stuff, and it's so easy to trick people online. And it's going to continue to happen. And we're at a weird turning point with technology right now today, especially with like AI, generative AI and deep fakes. Like I saw the first deep fake the other day that I personally did not know it was a deep fake, and it was actually of Tucker Carlson. And it was so well done. But these are the kinds of tools that are now available that are going to be used, and it's going to become harder and harder, especially as people like age up and our brains harden, and like all the disinformation is just so much happening all at once, and we are effectively losing what would be called the World War 3.0, which is the online war that has been happening with the hacks and all of these things. And so this is an entire episode on its own, and I would love to really lead a conversation on this, because there's just so much to say. But
it's also important, if I can just cut through real quick.
Yeah.
Everybody has the jokes about like the uber conservative Republican uncle, but these people work on both sides of the line. Like,
100%.
Highly encourage everybody to jump out. And I'm not correcting you. I'm not saying that you didn't, fill in the blanks here. I'm just trying to like global wrap up kind of thing. Like these Internet Research Agency, they create accounts for extremism on every single side of the political spectrum. So, if you can prop up Wikipedia right now, I still remember it. This paragraph about They created two accounts, the IRA. One was like United Muslims of America, and the other one was like Stop Islamization of Texas. And they created a protest where they told people to bring guns, right? And no one had any idea. Pringles gave an interview to RAA Novosti in 2018, and like the New York Times picked up on this article as well, where he's just quoted saying, "The Americans are very impressionable people. They see what they want to see. I have a lot of respect for them. I'm not upset at all that I ended up on this list." That's when he's referring, he got, pinged on the FBI's most wanted list. "If they want to see the devil, let them see him." But I'm Miles, and we have that episode. I'm just gonna hope that you go buck wild on it.
But I will say this, and there has been studies in the past couple of years, because the enigma that was online disinformation, I think this is the University of Ohio. They have done some studies on who had been the most susceptible to taking in disinformation and believing it, and unfortunately it does lean more to the right side of the spectrum. It's like what you had said earlier about this whole fake protest that was put together and had two opposing groups come and basically kind of like duke it out. That does show that, yes, of course, it's nobody is immune to propaganda, no matter who you are. And it's surprising. I mean, if you want to even go into like the origin of actual Nazi Germany, like a lot of that propaganda. Segue. Whew, go for it.
So, and this is another topic that's just massive, but we can briefly touch on it. As everybody should be aware at this point, not you guys, but listeners, Yevgeny Prigozhin is half of the founding squad of Wagner, which is, I mean, just is deeply rooted in Nazi bullshit as functionally you can get. If you believe the official version of the story, which I happen to, because there's not really any reason to. In this case, it's been, I think, confirmed across several sources that Prigozhin and his buddy, one guy named Dmitry Utkin, who is a well-established neo-Nazi, has neo-Nazi tattoos, whose call sign was Wagner, and who chose that call sign for himself based off of Adolf Hitler's love, allegedly, for Wagner waltzes, which are often referenced by people that are in those communities, unfortunately. So, well, the Wagner group, as we had discussed earlier, was founded by Yevgeny Prigozhin in 2014. And he, like you said, Miles, he denied everything vehemently until last November 2022. But the purpose being functionally to have a paramilitary group, which is legal in Russia. You cannot have PMCs in Russia, but this exists outside the law in Russia, to go and do smaller tasks and help kind of sow the chaos around different areas of the world that Russia is very good at sowing. Which, especially if you read up on people like
Dugin.
Like who?
Dugin. We should do an entire episode on that guy. The guy who wrote the Geopolitics of Russia, the book.
Oh God, yeah, that guy. I mean people more like Girkin.
Oh, okay. Well, of course, Girkin.
The guy they sent off to Bosnia to basically create a militia and then call them like the Free Bosnians and that shit that they were doing. The same stuff they did in the Donbass, basically, right? Where
the same thing they might be doing right now in Niger. We're gonna get to there at the end, I think.
We can touch on that.
On the current.
Because, again, each of these conflicts, in the point being, what is Wagner, right? But what's the whole point? He founded this group, but what is Wagner and what did they do? It's a weird mixture of mercenaries, a lot of prisoners. And Prigozhin was not ever, I think, modest or didn't ever feel any kind of shame in waving about his like prison cred. But even with like the recently in Ukraine, I think there was a lot of information going around where it was any prisoner can be given a contract of 6 months in Wagner and then they're free. So they just go fight in Ukraine and boom, they get out. But Wagner is, like I said, founded by a neo-Nazi. They have like the Rusisch group, this is the emblem here in the bottom left with the swastika. Just very, very obvious and linked neo-Nazi and far-right extremist elements.
Are you talking about the yellow emblem down there on the left?
Yeah.
So
Committing massacres wherever they go, rape, robbery, torture. Basically, a list of things that the Geneva Convention does not allow in traditional conflicts. These the Wagner Corporation has done and or orchestrated.
yeah,
But,
it's interesting
sorry.
how these kinds of symbols, because that I think, did you call it the swastika basically?
It's a Slavic swastika, I believe.
Slavic swastika, but that is an old symbol that goes back to just Slavic ancient history of a symbol. And unfortunately it's been, co-opted to be what it is today. The same with most symbols. But there's a lot of people who I had actually met in Ukraine who are not Nazis, but still like that symbol in much the same way that people who like Viking culture, like runes, that is like an old Slavic rune. But
like people in India don't understand that, like, why Hitler ruined the swastika, right? And it's not they don't understand, but like
right.
people in India are like, hey, what the hell? We used the symbol for thousands of years.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's important to note, like, if you see somebody wearing that symbol, it may not be because they are an actual Nazi. It's just kind of unfortunate because you can still have pride in your Slavic history and see that symbol as nothing more than just a symbol of being a Slavic person.
Yeah.
But it gets contentious, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and entirely right. And this is it's a contextual thing, right? This is a subgroup of Wagner that was founded by a neo-Nazi named Alexei Milchakov. We always screw that name up for some reason. And this is just like, it's called Rusich, which is what the Cyrillic characters mean here. But point being, we don't have a huge amount of time to go into what Wagner is and all the horrible shit. But because one thing I would invite everybody that wants to read about what Wagner is and does is open up the Wikipedia page, and in that right-hand column there, where you have like the summary, go through the number of battles that they've been in and check how many of them are just referred to as a massacre.
Yeah, they're brutal. Like the whole sledgehammer thing that was happening. I think they got somebody in a prisoner swap. I forgot the man's name. And they took a video. In Prigozhin, he is so theatrical that they took a video, and he's like, "This is what happens to traitorous dogs." And then he went on to say, "I hope no dogs were actually harmed in the making of this film." And in the film, the sledgehammer was taken to the dude's head. If that is correct, correct me if I'm wrong, if that is not actually what happened, but
that is my understanding.
That just, yeah, like I think I mentioned earlier, just absolute like video game level of tyrannical.
I mean, he's like a James Bond villain. Theatrical at this point.
Yeah.
But with inject the actual horror of what this guy is doing into it. What, Syria, Libya? Look at how many countries are on this map here. Central African Republic, that's the recent one where there's been lots of massacres.
Yep.
Mali, like Madagascar. Where, I mean, you could, Syria by itself, with Wagner in Syria, could be a whole episode by itself. They're just directly fighting against US-backed anti-Assad fighters, and there's no record of this. Like, I mean, there's no record of this, but it's going to be very hard to find good information on this, because this is a shady arm of the Kremlin, and they denied it the entire time, right? Just from the very beginning. Prigozhin himself doubled down and said that this is not funded by the Russian government. This is a small mercenary gang. We're going around. We're defending, the interests of Russia wherever it is. That's built right into their honor code, which is, at the end of the day, we do what we do for Russia. And it was only, I think, Miles, was it the same announcement on Kontakte when he just came out and said, "Oh yeah, by the way, this was all state funded and I'm responsible for it"?
Yeah, it's this is all kind of like coming in the past couple of years, right? And so it kind of leads up to the rebellion that we saw, which was just, it's still like ongoing. Like, we're not going to know exactly what's happening with the whole him targeting Moscow and running there. Like, he's come out and said recently also, like, I'm sorry, let me back up. Before he did that whole rebellion thing, he was, making comments about how the Kremlin's forces are inept, how they're not getting enough money, and how he's so tired of this he even has a quote saying like the whole war or invasion of Ukraine is just an awful idea and it being done terribly. And then he runs off and then just like attacks the Kremlin basically, or Moscow, and then stops. And anyway, I'm getting a little into the weeds right now, but what was your question, Ben?
No, I was just asking whether or not he confirmed that Wagner was state funded in the same message when he said that he was in charge of Wagner the whole time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I completely took that in a different direction. Off the top of my head, I do not know if that was the case, but it wouldn't surprise me. He's been coming out and saying a lot of things against the Kremlin, specifically in the past couple of years.
Artem, do you remember when he kind of dropped that?
Artem?
Oh, sorry, guys, wrong button. So I remember when Putin dropped it, when they said that Wagner was funded by the government, and it seems like we mentioned like a couple of times already, Geneva Convention, and it seems like a manual for Kremlin how to cheat and gain an advantage by breaking the rules but changing the uniforms. So what I mean, so they will do all dirty things that kinda forbidden.
Yeah.
And Russia kinda agreed to that. But still they would like to do it because this is the easiest way to get something they want or they believe they need.
Yeah, but it can't be like, well, yeah, dirty jobs that should not be traced back to official Russian government involvement. Right?
Yes, exactly, because official Russian says that it's not them. They have nothing to do with that. And still it plays in their favor.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mercenary lifestyle. I remember and to your point, these people will likely just have vanished, I think, in a lot of cases too, because the Russian government might have some documents on this, but you know, I think there was an airstrike in Syria where the United States bombed a complex that had a bunch of Wagnerites in it. And I think there was up to 100 dead or something like that. And the Russian government couldn't do shit about it because, you know, they're not officially there.
Yeah.
And I think they reported like 5 deaths or something like that.
Yeah.
And this is not me, you know, empathizing with mercenaries in any way, but it's just a report, just kind of to Artem's point that the Russian government then the entire time, like Artem, do you think that the Russian government was involved in the establishment of Wagner, or did they just like saw it as an opportunity?
Well, I believe that was the entire idea from the beginning. They just found the who would be relevant to the expectation of people with mercenaries power. And technically, he's making money with Russian government, but he's coordinated by like intelligence service.
Yeah.
But this is my opinion because like no proof of that can be found anywhere.
Well, again, Wagner's going to be an entire episode at some point, so let's just get down to our last point here, which was the rebellion, the Wagner mutiny, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That everybody read about here. This is recent, and this also got even more relative, so we can close it.
Artem, are you still there?
Defense forces like the Russian army and
Ooh, weird.
Wagner.
Okay. Wait, I'm sorry, Ben. You just cut out for a while. Artem, did you hear Ben talking?
For me, everything was clear.
Okay, then it's probably still recording. Okay, sorry, continue.
Cool. But no, the point being that the antecedent context being there was a lot of tension between the Russian Ministry of Defense and the army, right? And this Wagner, which was separate, air quotes, and run by Prigozhin, because Prigozhin was just throwing shade left and right, saying, you know, that Shoigu, the defense minister, is a disgrace, and that the Russian army is a disgrace, and that they're losing men. The Wagnerites are losing men left and right, and they can't hold positions, and. It's a laundry list of just everything wrong. So, it was Friday, the 23rd of June. Basically, Prigozhin publishes a message where he's in full military gear, saying that there's 25,000 of us, and you know we're going to sort things out. I think that night Putin gets briefed with an armed rebellion is going on. Next morning, Saturday, the 24th, people start seeing all sorts of images online of Wagnerites just walking around freely in Rostov-on-Don. because they've taken everything, right? They have just abandoned their positions in Ukraine, ostensibly, and hoofed it to Rostov-on-Don. Prigozhin's, keeps discussing this, saying that he's going to head to Moscow. So Moscow, again, this is not very far from Moscow. This is how many miles? Like 300 miles, I think, or something like that, from Voronezh to Moscow. Something like that. But point being, they split up, and the Saturday morning they start heading for Voronezh. I think I saw some videos, and I'm sure everybody else saw them as well, that the Russian Air Force was trying to bomb their convoys with limited success. The Wagner was shooting their helicopters out of the air with manpads, and they reached Voronezh, which is, a stone's throw from Moscow. But this is all against the backdrop of, him publicly being declared a traitor. Putin gets on TV and publishes a very weird kind of disjointed address calling it treason. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't honestly have Artem. I wasn't paying too much attention to like what Zelensky's government was saying at this point in time. I don't know if you remember any highlights from that.
I don't think they commented back then, like on the event, because no one was sure what's going on. So they were just silent.
I would like to also bring a point when they first took the first city. What was the first city that Wagner landed in? Rostov. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when they were there, like after reading some interviews and of the people who lived there, actual Russian citizens, saying that, we didn't really know why they were there, but Wagner forces were polite and they were nice. And a lot of people wanted to get like selfies with them. And it opened up kind of a new question for me, is like, what do Russian citizens think of Prigozhin? And I would say that he is looked upon very favorably. And there's another example here too. Like he's not just this world-renowned kind of like mercenary leader and stuff like that, but to his country, to the people who live in Russia, he is so much more, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think he's so much more pervasive in their culture and seen as a cool guy, I guess you could say. And one example is that it was about maybe 20 years ago, Prigozhin co-authored a children's illustrated book. Did either of you read about that at all? Because this is actually, huh?
Yeah, he wrote it with his kids.
Yeah, he wrote it as a kid. This is actually pretty crazy. He wrote it with his two kids, Polina and Pavel. And it was they only made like 2,000 copies or something like that. But inside of this book, it's about, I think it's called, what is this book called? Indraguzik, which is a made-up name. But it's set in a land of small people who live among ordinary humans, and they follow Indraguzik. Am I saying that right? Indraguzik. Anyway, so he falls from a theater chandelier and tries to find his way home, and throughout the entire story, it's him meeting other small characters, but it's really the commentary, and some of the quotes from the book. Like there's a quote saying, like, "How can I rule my people if they are so small? I could destroy them by mistake. Please make me the same king I was. Only a small king can rule the Indraguziks," which is like the king in the storytelling. Another character. And at the end of the book, there's a short poem describes the story of the Indraguziks' many adventures as, quote, funny and strange.
So you're trying to draw a parallel between this like tiny king and him being viewed as like a people's ruler?
Well, there's some analysis of this coming from inside of Russia. Let me go through my notes really quick and find these kinds of things. Some observers were saying that Prigozhin's outspoken criticism of top officials, especially lately, means that he has political ambitions and that he may want to try to reinvent himself again as a civilian leader. That's a good way to put it. He's viewed, or he views himself as a somewhat civilian leader. And there was a Russian political expert, Konstantin Kalachev. I apologize for botching these pronunciations, but this political expert is familiar with this book and said it was a nice story. And he described Prigozhin as someone who has evolved with the zeitgeist in Russia, and shifting from a convict to a chef to a children's author to a friend of the president and mercenary leader. And Kalachev, I again apologize, like he was going on quoting saying, he's like a mirror of the times, a diverse person striving for self-realization within what is possible. As long as being good was in fashion, he was good. But then the time came for evil, and he became evil. And so I feel like this is like the building blocks of what history books are going to analyze like 50 years from now, as Prigozhin being potentially one of the bigger historical figures within the context of Russia and Russian geopolitics, more so than Putin. But again, that's my own.
I'll help you segue to that point here, because how does this rebellion end? Saturday night, he just calls it off, right? This whole time he's on TV, he's on, posting messages and demanding meetings with like the Minister of Defense and shit like that. His March of Justice ends right about, I forget the name, Lapitsky or something. I forgot. This is too low contrast and image for me to zoom in, but meets with Putin a week later. They have some secret meeting.
The city was Lipetsk.
Yeah, Lipetsk. Thank you. And then no one knows the contents of the secret meeting. In classic style, Lukashenko comes out early July and says that he's in Belarus and the Wagnerites have all been pardoned if they,
yeah, they're saying contracts. That Uncle Luka gave him a call and got him to stand down.
Yeah, and he's not in Russia. And then flashback to 2 days ago at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
Check out those jeans.
In front of a Fabergé egg replica.
Oof.
So it's Russia. Look at that maid outfit. Oh my God. So to your point, Miles, I think going forward, despite all the horrific stuff, he still manages somehow to cultivate among Russians, and maybe just because Russians don't give a shit, and certain other countries don't give a shit. But despite the massacres, despite the civil wars and the conflicts and the death and suffering that he has sown, he's in Russia. He's back in St. Petersburg where he's born. He and Putin both. What his role is right now is unclear.
Yeah, well,
still reeling from this.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Ben. I apologize.
No, you're good.
Recently, like, he even came out and said that the reason that he did what he did against Moscow was to demonstrate the security holes that exist within the country. Which I guess, maybe he did it because of that. As we have seen, he is a super theatrical individual. But he also, while he was supposedly in Belarus, was making a call to his soldiers saying, hey, get ready for a trip to Africa. And then just like yesterday, at the time of this recording, what was happening in Niger with the coup that's happening right now, he is now saying that he's applauding the group that is doing this coup. And then he advertised for his Wagner group to come and help, specifically to help get rid of the Western colonizers' influence that they've had on the country. So Niger can stand as a strong, independent African nation.
Classic.
Yep. So I guess the calls of them going back to Africa, as of now, stand to be true. Going back, but also Niger, as many people probably know, is not the most economically stable country. But what they do have a lot of? Uranium.
Resources.
Uranium specifically.
I mean, in Syria, the Wagnerites were just getting a straight 20-25%, I think, flat from the Syrian oil fields that they were defending. So
yep,
they're getting money out of it.
Yeah,
But is he a war criminal? Yes. Is he, and to answer your original question, is he a monster? I don't know how you could do the shit that this guy does. and fall asleep at night. I'm sure he's got a family and things like that, but you know,
Yeah. I found his
Also-
son's
also have
LinkedIn
family.
page.
that's all I got for today.
What would you say the next move of him will be after the coup? Because it seems like this is not the end of the story. It's just
Oh,
one
it's not.
episode.
It is not the end.
Yeah, because it definitely moves somewhere. We just don't know where. Like what's the next target? Because it seems like his mercenary campaign and his troll factory seems to me like a very similar business. So they do political impact.
Positioning
if it-
himself for Putin's death. That would be my answer.
What was that, Ben?
Positioning himself for Putin's death.
Oh, yeah.